So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And this is a real pleasure for me because I've known about Norma for a while, and I finally met her about a year ago when I took a seminar on the power of storytelling in plant giving world. And it was a wonderful event. And it makes me feel like what I want to say to you all now is that it's nice. You can just, we're all here. We finally got here, the traffic, everything else. The weather's nice. So now you can just sit back, take it easy, and I'll let Norma Cameron start the conference off talking about stories. Thanks, Norma.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank CPRS Vancouver Island for inviting me to come and present to you today, and thank the board members and also the national board member who has decided to join us today as well. I have a lot to cover. My bio's in your handout, so I don't have to tell you about myself, and I think we should move on. I think as we evolve into a global community and definitely more and more a digital world, I think more than ever, we need to rediscover the power of story. I actually do think that while we exist in a world where we can communicate with people at lightning speed, a touch of a button can send your messages throughout the globe. What that has done in my experience over the last wee while is that organizations need more and more to be able to have compelling content to actually send out. And I think that it's time that we did look at the true power of stories and storytelling, but not just to collect them, but to understand why they work, how to put together that compelling content in a way to engage the listeners and your audience. And I actually think that the more we go down this path toward digital world, I think the more we're going to return to where we originally came from, and that was as an oral culture. So I do think, and as someone who has been the president of the National Arts Service Organization, Storytellers of Canada, Contours de Canada, which was devoted entirely to oral storytelling, I do have a bit of a love for the area of oracy and its power in today's world. So let me just quote something that I think you'll recognize probably. I'll tell you afterwards if you don't recognize. First of all, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, good. Because that's kind of important when it comes to storytelling. And welcome to our recent, it's all right. T.S. Eliot said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So with that, let's get underway. And I'm going to have to move really fast. I kept reworking this presentation, and it was so big that I had to keep cutting and cutting, like all good writers do. Edit, edit, edit. I started my life off as very, very quickly, immigrated, grew up in Scotland, went to England when I was 12, immigrated to Canada at the age of 18 and went to Gimli, Manitoba to work for the Bank of Montreal on the bank administration management training program. I like numbers. I think when Scots immigrate, they just put you in a financial institution. That's just the way it works, you know. So after a couple of years, when I felt I'd done my dues in the financial sector, I kind of did a little periscopal look around and thought, that's enough. I want to go back to my first love, which was writing and stories. So went back to study at university, undergraduate arts, and realized, I was in Winnipeg at the time, somebody said, no, the best, if you want to get into media and journalism, you have to take the creative communications course at Red River Community College. And so I went, and it was pretty hard to get in. We only took 20 students per year, and it's a 2-year intensive writing. It was wonderful. I loved it. I was really poor going through that because I didn't have a family to fall back on. I had a plasticized menu card shopping list card. I could spend $35 a week on food, and if I saved anything on a Tuesday night, I could go to the cheap-priced movies. But that was many years ago, and I've never looked back on that. But then I fell into, when I graduated, I actually went to what my fellow media people called the dark side, because I went into PR. And I worked primarily in healthcare with the Manitoba government, and was there for a while. Then I discovered charitable work and went to work for media and PR for something called the Western Canada Summer Games that was held in Winnipeg in 1990. And the fundraiser left after about 6 months of being there. And so my boss said, well, you can just assume that portfolio as well. And so that was like, just raise $4 million over the next little while. Sure. So I approached fundraising the same way we're taught in PR. What is the audience? So looking at the corporations, what were their objectives? What were their values? What was the match? Where could I find that match on that platform of values? And so we were successful raising funds, and I stayed sort of in the charitable sector, but always along has been the parallel of stories and storytelling. So I've been lucky enough to actually perform as a storyteller in Canada and the US, in Ireland and Scotland, and went back for a while and actually spent 3 months shadowing a storyteller that taught storytelling. Well, she still does, in Northern Ireland. So I went around 10 counties to teach little Irish kids how to tell stories. If you want to practice storytelling, find children. They are not polite. You have to do a good job. So, once upon a time. Believe it or not, when you heard that phrase, as we in the Western civilization are used to hearing, it heralds that a story is about to happen. And what happens through functional MRIs, we've been able to track brainwave activity. And what happens when we hear that? Now, different cultures have different signals. And the kind of Jamaican cultures, it's called crick crack. The storyteller will say crick, and the audience will say crack back. And they'll keep doing this until the storyteller believes that they've shifted and they are ready to hear a story. It also works in our civilization primarily with once upon a time. And what happens is we shift to, one would believe, if you believe in the right and left hemispheres, and I'm not a neurologist or a neuroscientist, but I do read a lot about brain research, and especially in realms of creativity. And I know that there is a shift primarily from the left over to the right side, which is the more creative. Left is logical and analytical, and right tends to be where our creative centers lie. It's never black and white, but in general. So what does that mean? It means that on the left, there's always where your judge and the critic. They're always there. It's the other little voice in your head that's saying, well, that's not very good. Even as a storyteller in performance, you should never get up on in front of anyone. It's the same with making a speech. Never get up and start. Because of the first few minutes, no one's listening to anything you're saying. They're sussing you out. They're figuring out, what does your voice sound like? Oh, it's a bit high, it's a bit low, it's a bit scratchy, it's got an accent, sounds funny. Oh, why is she wearing that? Her hair's a bit funny, she should have done this, or whatever. We're going through that whole, and it's a survival mechanism. We're checking each other out. And so storytellers right across have learned, how do they have a long enough opening to allow people to adjust, go through the judge and critic, and then make that shift. So one of my first tips is, if you're ever having to present or tell a story, take a little time to warm up your audience to who you are and what you sound like before you move into a realm that you want them to actually listen to. Because when we shift, we go into a sense of anticipatory expectation. We're waiting to be taken somewhere magical. We're waiting to go into a world that's quite different to the one we're in, and stay in the story for the duration, and then be returned safe and secure back to that spot where we started. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, oh my goodness, this is so woo-woo. I'm left logical. I have a preferred thinking style that's left, and this is a bit too right-brained for me. So you don't have to believe me, but the next time you go to a large movie theater, just watch what happens, and you'll see the shift actually happening. So people are sitting, they've got their movie-tone news, they've got their popcorn and their juice, they're getting settled in, they're shuffling around, they're praying that no one's going to sit right in front of them with a big head or a big hat. they're worried because the people behind them are talking too much and think, oh, I hope they're going to be quiet once the movie starts. And it's interesting because that's the judge and the critic, and they're there all the way through the upcoming trailers for new movies, right? And people are saying, oh, I'm not coming to see that because, you know, for me, it's like, I know the story. Why would I bother, right? Or, oh, definitely want to see that, love the actor, looks great. So there's all this judgment going on. And then something happens, and be aware of it. The screen will go black, and up will come feature presentation. And everyone settles down. It goes quiet. Everyone puts their popcorn usually to the side, because what is happening is we're shifting. We don't want to be reminded that we're sitting in a movie theater in a chair for the next hour and a half, 2 hours, however long it's going to take. We want to be in that story. We want to be taken away and not reminded, because to me, I don't know about you, but the sign of a bad movie is that I'm either looking at my watch or I'm suddenly aware of my surroundings. I've come out of the story. So it's another thing to remember, that allow your audience the comfort and the right environment to be able to go into that place and keep them. So the next time you go to the movie theaters, just kind of watch what happens, listen and be aware. Now, a lot of people say to me, yeah, that's all well and dandy, but I live in the world of business and I can't go into a business meeting, sit down with someone that I'm trying to impress or manipulate or whatever it is I'm trying to do and say, once upon a time, and wait for them to shift. And do like the newfies do, the storytellers. They're the best for doing that shift period. They'll say, once upon a time, oh, it's not in your time, it's not in my time, but it's in somebody's time. In fact, it was a wonderful time. It was a time where pigs would run around with forks stuck in their backsides, waiting to be eaten, you know, and they would do all of this kind of stuff just to kind of get people used to who they were and how they sounded. And then they would move into the story. So, just wanted to cover that before we move on. Let's just delve a little bit more into how we think and how stories make us feel and think. I always think everybody knows kind of the brain, basic brain science is you have a corridor that runs down the middle of the hemispheres, right? The corpus callosum. So think of that as the corridor. Now, think of the left hemisphere, the logical one, as the big family kitchen. Now, I'm thinking of the kind of family kitchen where, you know, you have a little island, perhaps with some bar stools, maybe the computer's in there, you have the big calendar on the fridge of all the family's activities, you know, the kids are eating, there's a television on, there might be even a little two-seater couch, and it's just hub and baloo, and you're making dinner, and all the time, sitting at the bar stool watching you is a judge and a critic. And every time you do something, there's a comment. Oh, you're not actually going to serve them that food for dinner, are you? Oh my goodness. Look, you're late again. Look at the fridge. You haven't updated, blah, 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 blah. So that's one place you can go into. Or you can go into the living room. Walk across that corridor, you go into the living room. Oh, it's the most beautiful room in the world. There's the glass all around. You look out, it's the most beautiful landscape you could ever dream of. And right there is a big comfy couch. And you sit on the couch, and there's this lovely aroma. Not quite sure what it is, but it's just so calming. And there's music, but it's just nice. And you sit on the couch. Where do you want the people that you want to impress to be when you're going to do a pitch, tell them a story? Any offers? On the comfy couch. And I often think that we do ourselves a disservice. So if we're in front of the business person and we're not going to say once upon a time, what I would usually do, because I've fronted many universities in fundraising, and some of those discussions have had, you know, millions of dollars on the table. So you have to go and meet very corporate people, you know, the philanthropreneurs of today's world who want a return on the bottom line. Social investment, I would hope. But what I would say is I have lots of information here for you. I have a whole package that will give you all the details that you need. But first, I would love to tell you a story that I think encapsulates what it is I'm going to be talking about to you today. Is it okay with you if I do that? I have never once had anyone say no, because people are hungry for stories. People have had it. They're drinking from the fire hose when it comes to facts that just come at them from every available source. And usually what I would do, and I've watched it, people put down their smartphones or their pens and they sit back. They actually get into a comfortable mode. Now, there's a couple of things you have to always ensure you do. And it's the same as when we go to the movies. We know approximately how long that story is going to take, don't we? And we've given permission to listen to the story because we bought the ticket and we've gone. So the same thing, you can say, I would really like to tell you this story. It's going to take maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay with you? And once you've got permission and they know how long it's going to last, they can settle down and they can actually shift to the mode of active participatory listening. And guess what? The judge and the critic is parked while you're doing it. And I'll talk a little bit about the flow and what you do after the story as we move through. But I thought it was important just to kind of show how do you introduce the emotional engagement story. You can do exactly the same in print version. And we'll dive into a little bit more specifics on that. So the evolution of story, meet Mr. Homo sapien. You know, they say that we developed sort of not language skills, but we started to use symbolic thought and cultural creative symbols as our rudimentary language when the Homo sapiens came on board, and that was about 50 to 70,000 years ago. There are other people that believe it was as far back as 100,000 years ago. But that's when we started to develop a form of language to communicate with one another. And then that was oracy, right? So for 50 or 70 or 100,000 years, we've been used to relying on speaking and listening as our primary mode of communication. So it's no surprise that we're actually still hardwired to remember facts couched in story, because that's how we've evolved. Now, let's just think about Gutenberg. He came along, 1440 is around the time when he developed mechanical movable type, and then heralded the whole print revolution that helped to inform the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Enlightenment, even scientific modern developments trace their history back to that. But that was only just over 500 years ago. So yes, we have shifted from oracy to literacy, but it's been a very short time period. So I honestly believe that perhaps we are still hardwired to accept, believe, and retain information as an oral culture, or even prefer that mode. So back to Homo sapien. Why was it important that we had facts couched in stories that helped us remember? Because there was no other way to remember. You couldn't write it down. You had to be taught over the span of your now, a good old age was probably in your 30s at that point. So stories had to be told to children very slowly but very deliberately. And the elders had a different role in that community. They held the wisdom and they passed out the wisdom to the next generations, because they had to know where the hunting grounds were. They had at least to know some genealogy, some history of where they came from. They had to know what plants and animals were safe to eat and which ones were not safe to eat. They had to know where they could go and where they couldn't go, how to fight. Everything had to be taught and remembered. And that is why the technology that we have developed for close to 100,000 years is one that relies primarily on the ability to remember facts couched in stories. And I know as a professional storyteller, some of my most favorite stories can be dated back hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's a reason why they've lasted as long as they have, because the bones of the story still have wisdom to hand to us. And it's such a shame that we've Disneyfied so many of our stories for children, because the dark side is an important thing to teach our young ones about, because by hearing stories and memorizing, we develop coping mechanisms. It's the same reason why we visualize important, frightening, upcoming events like going through your interview or visualizing around other things to help us develop those coping mechanisms. The other thing that was developed was songs or rhythm. Rhythm helped us remember. That's why some of the old ballads, and I've got friends in the Maritimes primarily who are incredible ballad singers, and it's not unusual for them to have 36 or 40 verses to their ballads. They take you on journeys for a half hour, you know, through these stories. So we did develop a technology, and the technology for packaging wisdom in a way that we could remember it was called story, and it's still a very powerful tool. And I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that progression means that we can leave the oracy behind and move to print and now technology. And I just think it's time to look back, and I'm so pleased you're doing this as a theme at the conference this year. So why focus on stories? Because it's still our predominant way of passing on information. We're all storytellers. We tell stories every single day. Hopefully we tell them to our children. Hopefully we tell stories of our grandparents and their grandparents. We collect them, we value them, we pass them on, because that's one gift only you can give your children. And they will eventually look at the value and understand the value. So very quickly, what's going on here? Anyone want to venture a guess to tell me what you think is happening? Someone's doing a crossword. Anything else?
It looks like a little bit of fear or concern in a couple of people. So somebody stepped onto the subway that they're suspicious about.
Yes. There is no right or wrong answers, you know.
They don't like having their picture taken.
Good point.
I think he wants to know what she's reading.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. What about this one?
Didn't go so well.
Just shout out whatever.
It's your 40th birthday party.
Ooh, lovely. Pardon? Someone ate too much ice cream. Mr. Whippy, yeah. Yeah. The reason why I'm showing you these is that we are very much meaning-seeking creatures. They say that we can go 40 days without food, water. I think it's like 20 days without food or 10 days without food, but we can't go for more than about 35 seconds without making something mean something to us. We are constantly making millions of micro decisions about what is happening and seeking. So it is important to remember that when you don't tell the whole story, people, and we know this in PR, they'll fill in the gaps, right? So it's just to remind us that sometimes we need to be very mindful of the fact that if we prefer to hear facts couched in stories, then think about the stories that you're telling or the pictures that you're using and the graphics, because people will make decisions. We need it. It's a survival mechanism. We used to have to be able to suss people out and suss situations out in milliseconds so that, a big tiger didn't eat us or something. And so it's the other reason why first impressions count, because we have two parts to our brain. We have the old emotional, kind of adaptive, unconscious brain that's our survival brain. You can't actually, and then there's the front, which is the rational brain. There's the analytical part, it's the more modern one, they say. Maybe Mr. Homo sapien didn't have such a big adaptive unconscious. But what happens sometimes is that we can't actually pull the curtain back. Think of like the Wizard of Oz, remember? You pull the curtain back and all the mechanistics are behind it. We can't always see what's going on, but it bubbles up, and it bubbles up in the form of feelings and gut instinct and so forth. So there's so much going on that sometimes looking at your story and making sure it covers all of the key parts is going to be important, because when you leave gaps, people will fill it in. Okay, what are the ingredients of a story? E.M. Forrester has a great quote. He'll tell you the difference between a series of events and a story. And so his series of events would be the king died, the queen died. A story, The king died, and the queen died of a broken heart. We've imbued it with emotion. There's a good chance that we'll forget all the facts that we hear, even at today's conference. But the things that move you emotionally are the ones that probably will stay with you. So again, when we look at the ingredients of any good story, there are what I would call the normal story arc. So always once upon a time, you set up a time and a location. We're hardwired to actually follow a story arc like this. We kind of want to know when things are happening, dates and times. So when you're writing stories, think about setting it up. I know this kind of goes against some of the inverted pyramid journalistic style, but this is the way a story is told. People don't have to question. Think of it as a theater where they paint the backdrop. So when the curtains open, you know the era, you know the background, you know the landscape. You don't have to ask any questions. You don't have to be wondering about that as you move into the next part, which is who are the characters, what are the protagonists, who are you actually, what's the story focusing on? And then obviously there's the plot. Why should I care? Create an opportunity or a conflict, and then the conclusion. Now, there are those that want to flip this on their head and be very creative about it. Start with the plot, then introduce the characters, which is all fine and well if you want to take your audience on a creative journey and make them work hard to get the information. The one I think that does that the most is, and I think I have a slide coming up, but it's Memento. How many people have seen the film Memento? Yeah, it starts at the end of the story and it works back, and the protagonist has a short-term memory of something like, no long-term memory, and his short-term memory is 30 seconds. So he's a tattooed body to remind himself as who he is, and he carries notes around. But the whole plot starts at the end and goes back to the beginning. It's quite a violent movie. If you don't like graphic violence, you might not like it, but I like it to watch it just from the perspective of looking at what it looks like when you start a story at the end. Now, there is another arc happening, but don't make your audience work too hard. That's the way that we like to follow the story. So I want you to think about the TV ad that first springs to mind. And if you want to call it out, you can. What's a TV ad that you remember? You don't have to love it, but you remember it.
Tim Hortons coffee getting picked up at the airport.
Yep. Tim Hortons coffee getting picked up at the airport. Anyone else?
I think it was I don't remember the company, which isn't necessarily a good sign, but I think it was Pampers, and it was like a baby reflecting on the first year of child care for.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I remember an investment one where they had the talking baby.
Oh, yes. Yeah, talking about finances, yeah.
That was the old Coke ad with I'd like to teach the world.
Yeah. Yeah. The one that springs to mind and I mean, to me, and I think it's because I've done this and a lot of people picked on it, so it's stuck. It's there. I can't help it. Oh, by the way, you might not think you remember the product, but, if you want to believe why they spend millions and millions on market research, they will tell you that, your emotional self will probably remember it, or it will trigger when it sees the label on the merchandise store. Whether it's true or not, who knows? It's the IKEA one where the woman is running out of the door. Get the car! Yeah. So I think TV ads do a wonderful thing for us. And I'm a cord cutter, I must admit. I no longer watch cable, I just watch on computer. But I still get ads. They may come from different countries, but I still get ads. And so it's a good thing to watch those to decipher mini stories because people spend millions of dollars on some of these ads. So why not, R&D, right? Rip off and duplicate ideas. So the first one is, in the charitable world, we share everything. So R&D is big. Why do you think you remember the ad? Just a thing to ponder if there's an ad that you like. What's the emotional response? Does it make you happy, sad, angry, all those things? And then have you ever, or anyone you know, had an experience similar to what's portrayed in the ad? And if you look at those, quite often, those are the ones that will stay with you if you have a personal relationship. And this speaks to the fact that if you're going to create a story for an audience, whether it's one person or a whole target market, the more you can make it reflective of their reality. And again, it's one of the fundamentals of PR is who is your audience? What is it that they would like to see? I always say, like in the charitable sector, what happens is everyone wants to talk about what the organization does and tell. Rather than flipping to what the audience wants to hear. And so that means you have to know your audience. And quite often, sometimes just listening to ads and looking at stories and how they are reflecting the reality of their target markets. And it's based on psychology, it's based on mental modeling, that if we give people maps and models that reflect their own reality, there's more of a chance that they, like a flight simulator, will actually follow that and believe that they've actually done that, been there, tasted that, gone down that path. And so they'll replicate it because it's familiar to them. It's like children who want to hear the same story over and over and over again. They want to go down that path. They want that journey. It's comfortable. It's safe. So if you're going to choose a story for an audience, think about who the audience are, and then have an inventory of stories based on the different perspectives of your different target markets, and roll that out when you're speaking to that particular target market or audience. It really helps them to see themselves in your story. And just in the way as print, you know how important white space is in print? It's the same in your story. You must leave gaps so people can find their way into your story. You have to invite them in, but you also have to leave enough room for them to play a part in the success of your mission. Oh, there it is. There you go. So for lovely evenings, viewing entertainment, yeah, you can watch Memento. There's another area that I've discovered in studying and telling stories and also interviewing people. This is primarily most important in interviewing, is that I believe there is the strata of a story. And the first one for me is just facts, the series of events. When you interview people, this is what they do. They give you the chronological experience. I went here, I did this happened, and then this happened, which is fine because you need the facts, right? If you're collecting first-person narratives to use in promotional materials and you interview people, that's what they'll do. You want to dip down a little bit because each of these levels will engage us and encourage these stories to be thrown into a longer-term memory stream and a neural pathway than the short-term. So the next one is feelings. This person went through this experience. How did they feel? What did it make them feel like? You know, what was the meaning? We're meaning-seeking creatures. And it's very easy in interview to just say, well, how did that make you feel? And if you can already kind of assume by what you're picking up on body language as to how they were feeling, you can actually say, seems like that was quite upsetting, or you seem like you got angry. Like, did it make you angry? Some people are quite surprised you're even listening to what they have to say, because in today's world, who listens anymore? There are people that believe that we're all walking around with a big hidden sign on our chest that says, I just want someone to listen to my story. So listening is a gift. It's a beautiful gift to give to someone. It doesn't cost you anything, and it will mean so much. Quick stat, 48 hours after you've had a conversation with someone, they're going to forget 78% of everything you've told them. They're going to remember 66% of what they told you. Therefore, if you want people to remember your core messages, you have to develop strategic questions to pose to them that will elicit the responses that most carefully reflect the core messages of your organization. I know that sounds convoluted, but you know what I'm saying. So you don't go in and say, this is what our organization does, or this is what we mean to you. You would actually say, what does our organization mean to you? What's been your experience? What have you liked about our organization? So the discovery or the questions that you ask will help them elicit the answers, but that means you really got to think about the questions. So, and then the most important, deepest level is the transformational stories. And that is when people dip down even more into how it made them feel and what it meant to them, what has changed in their life forever thereafter as a result of the experience. And it could be a short-term change, but the most important one is the transformational long-term change. So, and this is why we see in stories all the time. And from that point forward, Johnny never went down that path to the castle ever again. Or from that point forward, Billy stopped drinking. From that point forward, this person wore their seatbelt. It's what did the experience actually mean forever thereafter? What actually changed in the individuals that you are helping in whatever way you help? So, power of story. Well, let's dive into it. Daniel Pink, author, and I will be giving a handout, make it available to you afterwards with all the references to books and quotes and things like that. But Daniel Pink wrote the book A Whole New Mind. It's lovely. It's about how we all need to exercise our creative self. And I'll read it. Can everyone see the screen? Okay. Yeah. And this kind of ties into it. Memory and story. I've talked about this. I'll continue to emphasize it because to me it's what the real power of incorporating stories into our communications materials is all about. I've chosen a girl threading beads onto a necklace. And so there's a strand and then there's the beads themselves. The beads represent facts that we want someone maybe to remember after they've read the story or heard the story. And the strand is the narrative. And the way our memories work, efficient forgetting is crucial to sanity. We have to actually forget almost everything, the experiences that we have in any given day, or else we just couldn't remember everything. It would be impossible. We would go probably a little crazy. So forgetting is great. If you want your story to stick, if you want your message to stick, then you have to think of ways to strengthen the story. And using that narrative to put your facts in a story means that, and again, it's not just me saying it, there are this evidence-based practices that back this up, that facts couched in a story have a greater chance of being put into long-term memory as opposed to short-term memory. All memories are created, they're little neural pathways. And so if you think about using the facts and putting it in a story, there's a greater chance that not only will the story, the facts be remembered, but when something triggers that story, the stronger the strand is, the more likely when it's pulled out in the right order, that you remember the facts in that order that they were told to you or that you read. The way you strengthen the strand is by layering on more and more sensory responses. Now, I know it sounds weird because it's like, well, how do I put smell into a story? But we can. We can talk about aromas. So we think of all the senses, tactile, hearing, visual. I often say to people, one of the best tests of any communication, read it to someone, ask them to close their eyes and tell them what pictures it's painted. Because if it's not painting pictures, they're not going to remember it. They may not even comprehend it. And a lot of our gobbledygook org speak paints no pictures whatsoever. So test that, just test that. Say, close your eyes, I'm going to read this to you. What pictures are you getting? What's the visual memory? Because it's a very important one, especially people who are visually oriented in their learning style. The other thing, our taste. So if you can describe the taste of something, if it's applicable, don't throw it in if it doesn't have anything to do with, and there was a lavender smell in the air when, if it doesn't, well, you know that, I don't have to tell you that. So there has been a revival of storytelling. Have you noticed it? Like it's popping up everywhere. They're using stories though. It really ticks me actually. Using stories to sell cars, so anyone else? Like, what's your story? It's everywhere, right? So, but I don't mind. I think it's lovely. It just reinforces the power. So it's not just us. It's people who are putting millions and millions into market research. So again, a little bit of R&D. Wake up, smell a coffee, start to use stories. So there is a revival, and I think actually for a couple of reasons. Societies are a lot more transient than ever been. So people are not associated necessarily with one place, one community, one culture anymore. They don't carry the stories of their people or their place necessarily anymore. There's an increased sense of isolation. You look at any vital signs through community foundations or any other kind of mass research, people are feeling more lonely than ever. At a time when we have more ways of communicating, people are feeling more and more lonely. Storytelling creates community. It pulls people together around something they can share with one another and with their ideas. And we've kind of lost that natural community. And there is a rise in social media that creates so many other opportunities for us to create and share stories. And just look at what's happening. I mean, the rapidity of change right now with the internet is unbelievable. I think what's most amazing is the new celebrities. There was a research study that is ongoing. It's one of the universities in the States, and it tracks empathy among undergraduate students. And it also looks at the values. And it's amazing because for years and years, the values were always community, sense of belonging, family. It's flipped. The number one value for most undergraduates is self-promotion. And so we've moved into a realm where we all want to be celebrities within our own communities and make connections and have influence. And the corporate commercial market are going after the people who have the most subscribers and followers. How many of you know about vlogging? Yeah, Tanya Burr, Mac Barbie. I mean, the one with the greatest subscribers right now is a woman, Canadian, called Lily Superwoman Singh. And I think she has like 5 million or 4 million subscribers. And she gets like 7 million hits on her vlogs. And it's about an 8-minute, video of Lily just saying, hey, great, sorry I haven't vlogged with you lately, I'm just, it's kind of like Valley Girl kind of talk. Anyway, look up, just Google Mac Barbie as one of them, or Tanya Burr. But what's happening is, huge corporations now are affiliating themselves with these individuals. They don't even have to worry about product placement in the vlog. They just want a vlog that they can put on their corporate website. Why? Because what are those people bringing? An audience of their, if you could get 4 million people to suddenly, be influenced. So it's all about influencing and connections. So influence and connections. So why is there a revival at a time when we communicate? I think it's what we've lost over the last 50 or 60 years. I think we've lost time. We don't have time anymore. We don't have time to spend with people or share stories. We're all in the hurry up sickness realm. There's never enough time in the day to get anything done. And we don't share like we used to. We don't sit around and talk. We're so busy. I actually go off the grid a lot. I tell the people I work for I'm going to be off the grid. So unless it's an absolute emergency, then you can phone my landline and get me. But I value silence and I value mindfulness, and we have to carve time out for that. I love the fact that in Germany and other Nordic communities, they now have policies, labor standard almost policies, that disallow companies to expect their employees to respond to any emails after like 6 p.m. at night or at the weekends, To me, that just makes sense. We're going to drive everyone batty and stressed out. So try and encourage those at your workplace. So anyway, we've lost our ability to pay attention. We don't listen for as long as we ever used to before. Did you know that the word listen also means silent? It's an anagram for silent. So, but we don't take time to actually listen to ourselves, to others. We've lost that community, the community of place and a community of people, because we are much more inside. Kids don't play outside. I grew up where Saturday morning, off you went. Mom didn't know where you were, didn't seem to care. As long as you came back for your tea at night and you weren't too dirty, that was... And you know what? You had fights, and I used to climb up trees and get stuck up them all the time, and somebody had to go into someone else's house and get a dad or someone to talk me down or help me down. Or my mum would say, you can go out, Norma, but don't go near the green pipe, don't go down the old mill, because it was a big ruined old mill, and don't go to the Bullhaven Pet Cemetery. Guess where I went, Nobody knew. Nobody tracked us. We were the famous 5, to my girlfriend and I and 3 boys, and off we went. Great adventures, I think it's such a shame our children have lost that kind of freedom. So I think we somehow have to find a way to put it back into their lives, because we've lost the story of place and the people. We've lost the confidence in local wisdom. We sort of believe that wisdom has to come from outside of our communities, our families. We don't pay attention to the elders. These people have lived lives. They've gone through probably most of the experience or similar experiences that we're going through. And yet we live in a society where we put old people in homes and we don't spend a whole lot of time with them. I had a fantastic pilot project with a professor emeritus from UBC through the Centre of Aging at UVic. And we held for 13 weeks on Tuesday afternoons at Silver Threads in Sydney. We invited the old people to come in and write their life stories. And it was following James Birren's book, Guided Autobiography, out of UCLA. It was written about 20 years ago. And it outlines all the modules that you should cover when you're doing your life story. It was nothing about grammar. It was nothing about, you know, how to write. It was just about allowing these people to share and capture stories they could pass on to their children and grandchildren. The average age was about 82. And to watch the transformation in the room week upon week when they started to share stories of their life, their history, their family, their career goals. After a while, they were coming in just a little bit more higher, you know, standing up a little bit more erect. Suddenly, this woman over here was the pioneer in education in southern Manitoba. And the guy over there was an Air Force pilot, you know, and you could just see it. It's amazing what happens, how transformative it is to share our stories and to listen to what we can learn from the people who have come along the path and they're still alive. They have local wisdom, they're survivors. We've lost a common language even more so than ever, because now on Twitter and chat rooms, there are tribes that are created that use short forms, misspellings, to indicate who's in and who's out of the tribe. So if someone comes in and they're not using the, you know, the language of choice, then, you know, they're kind of kicked out, you know, because they're creating their own languages. So you're kicked out until you learn the language, then you're allowed in. So we've lost that common language. We're so into org speak. I mean, I read things, I think, how is anyone ever supposed to understand that? Brilliant book, Don Watson. Anyone read Don Watson's book? It's called Death Sentences. He was a speechwriter in the Australian cabinet. And one day he got the big package and he was asked to write a speech for a minister, and he read it and he read it. And he said, I can't understand it. I don't know what I'm supposed to be writing a speech about. It was complete political org speak and cliches and everything else. So he wrote a book about it. It's brilliant. It's actually brilliant. It cites like Huxley and Orwell, and but it goes into all these beautiful examples of org speak. And how all our mission statements sound exactly the same. And there's a mission statement in the book. It's all wordsmithed to death, right? I say to people, throw out your mission statement. Don't even try and change it. Do a workaround, because no one understands what it means anyway. You know. Anyway, sorry, that's a whole other presentation. But be careful. Try and use plain English. It's amazing, right? Plain English. More people will understand what you say. There you go. That in and of itself is worth the price of admission, right? But it's getting the permission to use it, which means we have to work for the people and encourage them to actually use plain English. We've also lost unquestionable trust. In communities, we used to trust the doctor, the local doctor, the teacher. We did what they said, the church, the police, the government. We've lost that. So it's harder than ever to win trust back. So that's something we have to be aware of when we're writing our stories, to not take for granted that people will just assume, or you can't assume that this is a medical person talking or someone from, you know, the police or whatever. We have to build that trust and earn that trust back. And I know I have to go quicker, right, Dave? I'm running out of time, sorry. Turning a point. I'm just quickly going to show in the healthcare sector, and I've done some work in narrative medicine. If you're interested in it, this is Rita Sharon was an English, I think she had a doctorate in literature. She went to become a doctor and realized that something was going wrong. Doctors weren't speaking in a language that patients would understand, nor were they listening. The average time after which a doctor, after asking, oh, hello, Mrs. Smith, and what brings you in here to see me today? If they're that courteous. Oh, that's terrible, I shouldn't say that. But they listened for an average of 20 seconds before they moved to either a prognosis or diagnosis of some kind. And so she has turned that around. She now teaches narrative medicine at Columbia University Teaching Hospital, and it's a mandatory course for all medical students. Google the Esther story if you're interested in healthcare stories and how composite stories of patients can make huge differences. And I won't go into the details, it's fairly long, but you can Google the Esther story. It's of Jönköping County in Sweden. I'll put a reference on my my handout. And the other one is Saskatchewan's like out the gate fast in Canada beyond all. And I've done work in Saskatchewan on narrative medicine and the power of sharing composite patient stories. So they're not real stories, but they are authentic because they're based on real life, real patient experiences. So I'll just, if you're interested, you can go on that. Stephen Denning, I'm going to read this one. Stories are powerful because they show us rather than tell us, dramatically enacting a truth that can move us and influence the way we see things. So again, it goes back to the old, and I'm going to give you a book, Peter Guber's book, Tell to Win. I mean, it's all about show, don't tell. He comes from kind of movie land, Hollywood. It's a brilliant book. So who are the story pioneers? Well, we all know Steve Jobs was a story pioneer. He had three, he always, if you've read anything about him, all his presentations were 3 points, because people can't remember anything else he said. And his kind of mantra was, tell a story, paint a picture, create a vision. That was it. If you're doing that, you can be successful. He's wonderful to study as far as communication and how he wraps stories, especially metaphorical language and analogies. We have to get back to using those. Those are shortcuts to buckets of wisdom. So try, again, along with convincing people on the plain English side that it's okay to use metaphorical language and analogies, and try and find the ones that suit your organization and their mission. 3M executives all get storytelling classes. They're all trained in how to be effective storytellers. And there's a whole realm of narrative leadership that is kind of taking off. NASA uses oral archives when all the astronauts land. So along with all the scientific data, they collect the oral archives because that's what makes meaning. And Xerox, same thing. The photocopy repair manuals were never being looked at until they recorded photocopy repair senior people training the younger ones. Oh, you know, when the model 2562, when you open the drum is going shtick, 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 you know that it's stuck down here and this is what you have to do, right? So Stephen Denning did this work, and he created a narrative database as a framework to look at oral archives and how to translate them into the knowledge resources for companies. It's now worth over $100 million, so he did okay. And Oxfam Shelf Life app, Google this one, I'll show you it very quickly. So Dr. Chris Speed at the University of Edinburgh, who focuses on something called design informatics, did a research project with Oxfam in a little secondhand shop in Manchester. And what he did was, this is an app, they developed an app. So when somebody was donating an object to Oxfam, they could take a picture. Well, they would go into the store and pick up a little QRT tag, QWERTY tag, right? And then they would go home, they would take a picture on their they'd load up the Oxfam Shelf Life app, take a picture of the object, in this case it's a teapot. They would write a little story about the data shadow of the object, and then they would upload it and scan the QWERTY tag. So then when the object was on the shelf, anyone with a smartphone coming along could scan that tag and get the story about all the objects. In the first 2 weeks, sales went up by 50%. And it's now throughout all the Oxfam secondhand shops. And now it's being replicated by other more commercial entities. So again, Google that if you want more information. Here's the stories that you should have. You should definitely, for your organization, shape and share these stories in plain English. Your history, who founded you, why, when. Your purpose, otherwise known as the mission statement, which I don't use. I do purpose statements because then you don't have to get them approved by any boards. They're lovely. And they're cause related. It's all about why you do what you do, not just what you do. The vision, where are you going? What will it look like when you get there? What would it look like if you didn't exist? If you erased your organization from the map, what would that future vision look like? Sometimes that's the back door into actually creating a worthwhile purpose statement and vision. Fiscal health good steward stories are more important than ever. What are you doing? Why should I entrust my money to you? What are you doing with my tax dollars? Prove to me that you are good. The leadership story, who's governing you, your board of directors, your senior, and not just who they are and what they do as a CV, but why do they do what they do? In fact, we should all be able to say, I work at blah, blah, blah. I do it because, and tell a story, have a connection. I work with teams to do personal mission statements that overlay with their organizational mission statement so that when they meet people, it's not just handing a business card and saying your position. but it's saying, I work here because of da-da-da. Don't forget your zingers, your amazing stats, facts. They should all be back pocket. Did you realize that? Blah, blah, blah. And the other thing is, what are the opportunities for people to get involved with your organization? What's the call to action? Because why? Once you have all of those in a database, then we can use stories strategically. And here's kind of the magic formula, as it were. The stories will engage people emotionally. It sets them up as why you should care. And what it does is the most effective story to lead with is a first-person narrative, how you're having an impact on an individual in your community that you serve. So if you start it from there and then what I call zoom out and include the proof, the evidence, the statistics, why you? Why is your organization best suited to do this work? Where's your expertise? What's your track record? What impact have you had on other people in the past? It's a zoom out. So you get the emotional connection, and then you put it into the larger context, because now people have an emotional connection to understanding what it means. You've just told the story of one person. You can quite easily say, this was one person whose life we changed, or we made it easier for them. Now let me tell you a little bit about the context. We have X amount of people that we can help. With what we've got right now, we can help these people. We're pretty confident. We're doing a good job. But with your assistance, with your support, with your help, with your advocacy, just imagine what our future could look like and what we could do, right? That's the zoom out. And then call to action. So here's what you can do. Here's how you can help, or here's how we can help you make this happen, or we can alleviate this in your life, or eradicate, or maintain, or whatever. So that, to me, story, stats, and a call to action, brilliant way to look at any communication material. They should all be there in some form. There should be an emotional, there should be proof, evidence, and there should be some kind of opportunity for a call to action. Don't forget the dark side. Don't be frightened to go down the dark side. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. That is such, if you just let it, carry it around with you for a wee while and think about it. We keep taking the dark side out of everything, out of stories, we're frightened to go there with people. That's how we develop coping mechanisms. That's how we truly, truly understand what is going on in our world. And unfortunately, for a lot of people that have that sense of isolation and a lack of belonging, they're looking for a narrative that does talk about the dark side and what they can do about it. We know that the radicalization of youth is, because I think it will become more and more apparently linked to a sense of isolation, non-belonging, non-purpose in the community in which they live. So they're looking for that other narrative. And it's interesting that from a militaristic perspective, we're now talking about the need for countries to develop a new narrative for their youth to feel engaged, involved in community, to stop them going off and fighting someone else's war. So narrative can be huge. I mean, its impact can be, again, plain English. Can you read that? It's not like I probably violated a copyright law by using it. But basically, it's not about what we say. We've got to really think about what our audience hears. And I probably don't have time to read you a politically correct bedtime story. I'm sorry, I've gone over time a wee bit. We started a wee bit late, but I'm now a wee bit over. Well, you know what? I'll read you what it would be like if we told. Is it all right? Is everybody okay for a couple of minutes? I'll just read the excerpt. I won't read the whole thing. And it is. I'm reading it because I couldn't ever tell it this way. And then I'll wrap, sorry. And for questions, I was supposed to break for questions. You can corner me somewhere and ask me anything you want. Okay, first of all, two things. Here's the mission statement. Quality service and best value for our clients. Individual opportunity and respect for each other. Integrity and excellence in our work. Distinction and the competitive edge in our work. That's the core commitment of an organization called CICI, and they run, and this is on the wall of the Agu Rib prison. So there you go. Yeah. That's how widespread and non-communicative and useless our mission statements and our core qualities and our values and their, so we have to find a workaround. Don't change them. You'll do so at your peril. Okay. So here we go. See who can recognize this story. And this is what it would sound like if we didn't use plain English, even in our fairy tales. Through the thicket, across the river, and deep, deep, deep into the woods, there lived a family of bears. A papa bear, a mama bear, and a baby bear. And they all lived together anthropomorphically in a little cottage as a nuclear family. They were very, very sorry about this, of course, since the nuclear family has traditionally served to enslave women, instill a self-righteous moralism in its members, and imprint rigid notions of heterosexualist roles onto the next generation. Nevertheless, they tried to be happy and took steps to avoid these pitfalls, such as naming their offspring the non-gender specific baby. So I am probably going to wrap there. I think I only had one. There we go. That's my wee dog. That's him reflecting. Actually, you know what that is? You know when you come off the Mill Bay Ferry, we were going up to Qualicum for the day. I like going up there and swimming. I swim in the ocean, right? And it's the best, like Qualicum Beach. And so this is wee Bobby on a holiday, and I thought it just encaptured the way I feel and the way I was feeling. I just took a picture, you know, on the side mirror. He sits on my lap. He's an old guy now. He's like 15, and but he's okay. Greyfriars Bobby, that's his name. He's a Cairn Terrier. So there you go. Thank you very much. Again, sorry I've cut into the question time, but please come and ask me any questions, and I'll give you, promise, I'll have something up tomorrow. I'll send it around with all the references and the books. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry about over. Thank you very much.